So let's continue on our 2.1 variables and operators, and now we're going to work on data types. And data types in JavaScript are dynamically typed, and we'll talk about what that means, and we'll talk about the kind of the most common data types, and there's other ones, but we'll cover just the basics here. And then I'll give you some prompts as before. One thing I want to start with is I have my live server pretty much where we left it last time, and I have my code space, not my code space, but my private repo open. And I did add 2 lines, which you can add. You will need this one for sure. And again, I may update the content going forward, but I like having the console logs there. But I wanted to talk about something that's a little foreshadowing, and if you don't know that term, it's something we're going to talk about soon. I always like to introduce things where it kind of makes sense. So right now, I'm using live server. My page is loaded. All my output has, all my code has run. I don't have any breakpoints. And so if I just hit refresh, that just runs. It's so quick you can't even imagine. But if I set that breakpoint, I said before, and I want you to see this, is that it's going to halt on the first line of the JavaScript. And notice, as I said before, why does the HTML go away? Or appears to go away. And that's because of something that we didn't really talk about that we will in the index file. And it's the idea that when this file loads, it loads in sequence, which means it goes through, sets up the HTML because it's rendering what we call the DOM. You'll hear this in a little bit more. And then it has the script that says, hey, go find the HTML. Well, what happens here is because of the way we've placed it, where we've placed it, it is stopping the execution or stopping the loading sequence right there, which means it's not to the HTML yet. And that's really not the way we write JavaScript because, as you will see in the near future, we write JavaScript to update the DOM, to render the DOM, the document object model. Don't worry if you don't know these terms, but what I want you to know here is in order just to fix this for today, but also as a foreshadowing, I'm going to put defer here. Now when I put defer, nothing changes right now because I'm on pause, right? But if I let this run, I take off this, okay? And actually, no, I leave it on. Yeah, so actually I leave it on. I'm going to hit refresh. Now what will happen is this will not go away. And the reason this doesn't go away is that it loads, it defers this loading of the JavaScript until the body is ready to go. And the thing that we refer to as not just the body of the body of the web page, but the whole thing is called document, okay? And so when I go down here and type document, and you're going to see this soon, right? This is the whole page, and the reason it shows up is that we deferred this JavaScript to be loaded until everything was ready. But we're also going to find other ways to make sure this happens because you can imagine all the things that can happen in a web page. Okay, so we're going to leave that the way it is. Remember, start getting used to the idea of stepping through code, right? Stepping through, looking at code. We'll talk about how you can read some of this in the future, but just knowing how to step through code right now is where you want to be, okay? And remember, when it gets here, it's just dropped into that live server, and you can just hit run to let it run all the way through if you want. Okay, all right, let's actually do what we're here to do this time. Let's talk about data types, okay? And let's write some code that helps us understand it. Now, for this one, I'm going to go ahead and drop my index file because I no longer need it. I'm here, right? And so what we're going to do is do let, okay? And this is where we see the idea of camel case. So player name equal hero. Remember I talked about you can use single or double. You all want to use semicolons at the end, okay? So now we've set up we've declared a variable, we've assigned it a value. That value is a type, okay? So what type is it? So in this case it's a string, and we'll come back and put some content in a minute. And so let's say player health, very common if you're writing a game, is 100. Okay, so now this is string, This is number. We'll talk about in JavaScript, there's different ways we talk about numbers, whole numbers, right? So we'll talk about that, and then we say let. So here's another variable, is game over. Now this is also a way that we can define variable names that tell us what it is. Is game over is true or false, right? So this is where a new term you may not have heard called Boolean. Is that true or is that false? Okay. So now let's come over here and grab some content or some comment, right? And you can either put these, I sometimes like to put them to the side because in this case it's pretty short comments. They show me what these are. I do like to also put them, it's my brain that wants them to be, you know, tab. No, see, in this case I should have used tab, so actually that would have been a better way to do it. Okay, and this is where we could get into the way the editor, the way tabs work, but for this case, there we go. Okay, so this is a string, and we can tell this just by looking at the value, but there is a way in JavaScript, and we often may need to do this in a programmable sense. A programming sense is the right code that tells us what is in that, stored in that variable name. What kind of data type is it? Because in this case, all we're doing is, and in this case JavaScript is actually just looking at what we've included on the other side of the equals. Now remember, this is an assignment, right? And we'll talk about operators and what they mean, but all we're doing is assigning that value into that variable name, okay? So what we really want to do is what we're going to do next, which is to console log, and that's what I mean by is what we need to do here, right? I'm going to say, right, player, and this is where again I'm using my template strings. I'm using my dollars, my dollar sign, my curly brackets, and then I'm going to do player name. Again, the editor is trying to make my life easier. Thank you very much. Is a, again I could do, and I should actually could shortcut that but it's okay. Is a, and this is a new thing you haven't seen, type of. So this looks actually at the of what a value is, and what is stored in that variable is a type of. So that's actually a JavaScript command, and now we can actually give it the variable name. Okay. So now if we go over to our output, we let this run again, because remember it's hot loading, meaning, right? Actually, I didn't work. Hero, and this is the last thing on here, is a string, okay? And in this case, I could put, just to make this type of, right? And if I did, I'm going to take off that, and I'm going to let that run. Good. Type of string, okay? And so now we're going to do this for the other variable names, so I'm going to make my life a little easier just by doing a little copying and pasting here. Player health. Now we could also talk about how you can select both of those, player health in that line, but for today we'll leave it as is. Okay, so now before we even get there, what's your guess about type of player health, right? So it's a number, it's a type of number. Now these are also called primitives. So when we create these type of variables and we give it these types of values, strings, numbers, booleans, maybe a couple other things, but typically these are called their primitive types. And we're going to have other things that we define very soon in this course that won't be primitives, it'll be reference types, okay? And we'll talk about that. All right, so let's do one more. Again, and by the way, there is also a keyboard shortcut just to take that last one and duplicate it. So is game over is a type of what? So you can see up here, we know because of our code what it is a type of, because we don't have much code, but you can imagine on a larger code base, this would be harder to do, okay? Okay, so hero is a type of string, 100 is a type of number, false is a, oh, sorry, I was like, why is that last one? Is game over? Oh, right. It took me a minute. I don't know why. But I was like, oh, shouldn't that be the actual? No, it's what's stored in there, which is Boolean. Okay. So in this case, I'm not having you add any comments because the console logs are actually doing that comment. But one other thing I'm going to have you do, and I actually meant to do it last time, but I thought, you know what? We can do it now because we've talked now, we've shown you how to assign data types, right? And that JavaScript, I've barely talked about it. It'll be in your search terms to check out. It's dynamically typed, which means when JavaScript evaluates that line, that expression, it basically looks at the data that you have on this side, and it then sets up that variable to be that type of data. But because I'm using let, I could change it. But if I was using const, I could not. So what really sets up something I want you to understand called Rio's variable rule. So my rule when setting up variables, because it's kind of like, especially when you're new, it's like, do I use let or do I use const? Here, and I want you to write this and by understanding it, is that my rule is that start by using const. And if you're not, if it throws an error, but by the way, over time you will understand when it would. But as a general rule, just use const unless you can't, then use let. And that just keeps it simple. And by the way, it's more complicated than that, but you don't have to make it that complicated when you're first beginning to code. Okay, so let's look at our terms you want to check out. So in JS, distinguish between primitive and reference types and give examples. So this would be, again, where you go out to the LLMs, you search this, you get some content, and this is where having a conversation, right, with a chatbot to help you understand some of the terms you've been introduced to here that you want to extend your knowledge for, right? Explain what it means for JavaScript to be dynamically typed and provide examples of variable types, how they can change. And this goes back to the const versus let concept. And then analyze primitive data types and the utility of type of operator, which we saw in this example today. So your job now that we've written code, and again, you have code that works without error, right? That's what you want to have here. And then you'll do your commit, right? So this is what I told you last time. I'm not going to do it this time. So your commit for this one is data types. And then you will commit in your workflow. And then we'll move on to arithmetic operators.